How's it going, y'all? I want to take this video to tell y'all a quick story about my recent experience with tech layoffs in early 2024. If you've seen any of my other previous videos, I've definitely mentioned this, but I really just want to take an entire video to go into the nitty-gritty of everything that happened. So I'm going to break this video down into three main sections. The first is going to be the layoff day itself, all the events that took place on that day, and kind of some emotions that were going through me as all those events transpired. The second is going to be essentially the 3 months that I was unemployed, what my day-to-day looked like, and what were all the things that I was doing to try and secure employment. And then the third is going to be kind of a reflection. Now that I'm 5 to 6 months removed from my unemployment, looking back, are there any things that I would have done differently if this, God forbid, were to happen again in the future? Is there something else that I would have done maybe in the immediate time after layoffs and also during my unemployment? So yeah, let's hop right into this story. I'm going to go back a little bit before layoffs actually happened and just talk about that entire experience. So kind of setting the stage, my team was working on a really, really big project and we weren't making a ton of progress on it. A lot of folks on the team were frustrated, tensions were kind of high, team morale was really low, and this had been going on for, I don't know, maybe about 6 months to a year, and things weren't great, but I did enjoy the work that I was doing. I really liked the company that I worked for, and I really had no intentions of leaving. So fast forward a little bit, this is now 2 weeks before layoff day, and my girlfriend and I had just moved into a new apartment. We were super excited about it, super excited to start living together, and also just the place that we're living at was really awesome. So that was amazing. And now fast forward the day before layoffs, and I'm perusing an online forum called Blind, and essentially it's like an anonymous forum just for your company. And there were some rumblings. There were some folks that were saying, hey, layoffs really might be happening. We had some okay earnings calls, the past 2 earnings calls, nothing special, but nothing terrible either. But we had another earnings call coming up that Friday. And so it's Wednesday night at this point. And I say to my girlfriend, I'm like, hey, there are rumblings, layoffs might be happening, and something might happen tomorrow, honestly. And she kind of brushed it off. She was like, no way, that's probably not going to happen. And so I log in on Thursday morning like I always do. And there is a pretty ominous message from my director, I think it was, and he said, keep an eye on your email this morning. There's going to be some communication from our CEO, and we'd also just got a new CEO 2 months before that too. So all this is just happening all at the same time. And so everybody starts freaking out. I'm talking with some of my teammates, and we're just waiting for this email. Essentially, that's all we can do. And finally the email comes, but the email just says, hey, if you get another email that's coming sometime today, then you'll probably be part of some reorganization. So keep an eye on your email for this next communication. And so at this point, we're really freaking out because we have information that, yes, layoffs are happening. And now we just have to keep refreshing our inboxes to see if we are the unlucky ones that get the email. If you didn't get an email, then you're all set. You get to keep your job and you get to just move on with your life. So we're just literally refreshing there for 30 to 45 minutes. And unfortunately, I get the email. It says, thank you so much for all the time and effort that you put into the company. We really appreciate it. But we're doing some reorganization and your position is being eliminated. It was pretty vague too about next steps. It just said that your manager would be reaching out to you. And I waited a little longer, hadn't heard anything from my manager. And I had to reach out to her because she also just found out the folks that were getting laid off as well. A handful of other folks on my team were impacted. And so she was kind of reaching out to everybody just to talk about what was next. We had a really just brief 5 to 10 minute conversation. She was really beat up about it. Like I said, she had just found out about it with everybody else. And, those are really hard conversations to have. She assured me that it wasn't performance-based, which was nice to hear. But obviously, it still stings. After that conversation, I kind of just said my goodbyes to some of my teammates and folks that I had worked with, exchanged some contact information just in case we wanted to reconnect later on. And then I just closed my laptop and stared at a wall for 30 minutes because I was prepared for it too. That's the thing is I had told my girlfriend the night before that it was possibly going to happen, but I feel like it doesn't really kick in until it actually happens. Like, you do not have a job anymore. So I literally just like stared at a wall for 30 minutes and waited for my heart rate to go down before going into my girlfriend's room and telling her what had happened. From there, I just needed to go for a walk. So I went for a 30 to 45 minute walk just to get my heart rate down some more and kind of just think about all the things that needed to happen now. Unfortunately, I needed to start applying for jobs again. So this is like an hour, maybe an hour and a half after I had received that layoff email, and I finally get back to my computer, and I'm like hoping to say a few more goodbyes, but I open my computer and I've lost access to everything, completely kicked out. My user account doesn't even exist anymore. They worked really fast. They knew what they were doing. The only other correspondence that I had with the company was to talk about things like insurance, if you wanted to sign up for the Cobra health insurance, how to send your computer back to the company, and also about a severance package. I do think I was really lucky and fortunate to have had a pretty good severance package. It was 13 weeks, and I got to keep my health insurance throughout that time, but I kind of used that as a framework for how I wanted to structure my job search afterwards. If I could find something in those 13 weeks, it's kind of like nothing was lost. You know, you're getting paid throughout that entire time, so it's not like you're losing salary or health benefits or anything like that. So that really became my goal. It was, how can I find a job in 13 weeks? And with that, I will now transition into what did I do for those 13 weeks and what were the things that I was trying to do in order to gain my employment back. So like I had said, I had heard some rumblings the day before, and so like a responsible young man, I decided to update my resume the day before I got laid off without having any idea that I was actually going to be laid off. So that was nice. I didn't have to spend time doing that, and I could just really jump right into applying. And at this point, you could probably insert like an anime training montage of somebody, who's really weak, and then they're just in the desert beating up boulders and stuff. That was essentially me for 3 months straight, except not punching boulders, but instead applying to software engineering jobs. I do have a video on my channel previously that talked about the 239 applications that I sent out in this 3-month time frame. I'll link that up above and down in the comments as well if you want to check that out, because that is a more of a deep dive on the strategy that I used to crank out that many applications. But if you're curious what a day-to-day looked like while I was unemployed, it was quite literally wake up, go on LinkedIn, apply for jobs for a couple hours. Then I would take a little bit of a break. Maybe I would go to the gym if I was feeling healthy, which honestly didn't happen most of the time. And then noon would roll around and I would do the same thing, about an hour or two of job applications. And then end of work day 2, about 5 p.m., go through the same thing again. So it was like every single day, 3 specific intervals throughout the day to try and be the first application on all these new jobs that were being posted. And in between that, it was preparing for interviews. I was pretty fortunate that I ended up interviewing with like 10 to 12 companies throughout the time frame. I only ended up getting 1 offer, but I guess that's all you really need. So like I said, in the time that I was not actively applying for jobs, I was preparing. The primary form of interview prep that I was doing was lead code problems. Unfortunately, they are still prevalent in 2024 if you're applying to software engineering jobs. They're not everywhere, which is nice, but at least half of the companies that I was applying for were asking like straight up lead code questions. I tried to also work on some of my own projects to get more of like hands-on project work throughout that 3 months, but really the lead code questions and the applying to jobs and then the interviewing themselves took up the majority of my time. So there was really just not a ton of time for project work itself. The other way that I was kind of preparing for interviews is I would get a phone screen with a company and I would pass most of the phone screens onto the next round. But if I had a company that I knew I was going to have a second round interview with, I would go to a handful of forums, so mainly Glassdoor, Blind, and the LeetCode forums, and I would try to find the types of questions that these companies would be asking in their interviews. Companies do try to crack down on that stuff as much as possible, so you probably won't see like exact questions that they'll be asking, but if you can get a grasp of the type of question that they're going to be asking, like is it going to be a straight up LeetCode question? Is it going to be more of like a data structures with a business context kind of question? It gives you a better like mindset to prepare for that interview, and you kind of know what you're going to expect when you go into it. For the most part, I would say that this actually is pretty effective. The amount of competition that there are for these software engineering roles is so high that any kind of competitive advantage you can give yourself, I really think you have to take it at this point. So yeah, a brief summary of the day-to-day. It really was lead code, applying for jobs, sifting through forums to try and find, any kind of information that I could about a specific company's interview process, and that alone, I would do that every single day. So for 7 days, and I wouldn't take the weekends off or anything like that. I was working significantly more than I was at my previous job. And I got to tell you, I was going insane. By the end of it, I was incredibly burnt out. And if I had to keep going, past that 3-month mark, I don't know that I would have been able to sustain it. To kind of portray the mindset that I was in during this time, I have 2 things from my notebook that while I was in the grind and the unemployment made sense and were fine for me to do. But now looking back on it and reading these things, they kind of sound insane. So I want to show those to you real quick. Okay, I'll insert a picture of this job interview schedule that I crafted for myself. And it was essentially a day-by-day planner of every interview that I had, which is good to make sure that I was not forgetting anything. I will say that there were a lot of kind of interviews that were happening simultaneously. So I definitely wanted to make sure that I wasn't forgetting anything. But on the other hand, it's kind of just insane. It starts off with this giant laid off on February 15th. And that's how I know exactly what day it was, because of this stupid calendar. But then it just shows every single day, like, oh, if I had no interviews on February 21st, I made sure that I told myself that. And then, every single day that I had interviews, the company and the time slot and which interview it was. So that only lasted for the first 2 months of unemployment, I think. And I'm glad it didn't last any longer than that, because it was really just capturing all of my failures. Honestly, it was kind of just like a running log of all the interviews that I ended up failing. So I'm glad that I stopped doing that, but wish I had never done it in the first place. And the second thing that I want to share with y'all from this notebook that was kind of a representation of the mental state that I was in is a journal entry. And I don't write journals very often, but I felt compelled to, because I just wasn't doing so great. I had just failed a couple of interviews that I was really excited to potentially work for those companies, and the interviews just didn't go my way. And so I did some reflecting, and this is just a short excerpt from this journal entry. There is something else that I've been struggling with during unemployment, which is that I have somehow deeply intertwined my self-worth and identity with my employment status and competency as a developer. This is an incredibly dangerous mindset, because in many ways, my employment status is out of my control. If I do have a job, I could be laid off at any time. If I don't have a job, I'm at the mercy of recruiters and interviewers. So yeah, sorry, not to get all deep and sentimental on y'all, but it definitely was a realization that I had that, and I think this happens in a lot of other professions too, but with software engineers that I've talked to, for some reason, this intertwining of identity and employment and being a software engineer is really deep. And I think it definitely impacted me a lot that I wasn't technically a professional software engineer, and the fact that I was unemployed made me feel like even more of an imposter than maybe I do on a day-to-day. And so kind of just reflecting on that maybe helped me a little bit. But all that's to say that I just really wasn't doing so great during those 3 months. And shout out to my girlfriend. She was really supportive through the entire time. And I always felt like I could talk to her about anything that was going on. So shout out to you. And I'm just really, really glad that it didn't last more than the 3 months, because I know that there are a lot of folks out there struggling, possibly feeling exactly the same way, except their job searches are taking a whole lot longer. So I just kind of want to be a resource if possible. Definitely leave a comment down below if you're feeling some type of way. I'm going to respond to every single comment. I always do. And yeah, let's just all try to look out for each other, because it is rough out there. Okay, on that note, I want to segue into the final part of this video, which is just talking about if this were to happen to me again. I really hope that it doesn't. If this were to happen to me again, what would I do differently? Because quite honestly, I would do a lot of things differently. The first and most obvious one for me is take some time for myself directly after the layoff. Like I said before, I had already had my resume ready to go, and the day that I got laid off, I didn't even wait till the next day. The same day that I got laid off, I started applying for jobs, and the process just started immediately. I think just giving myself a few days or a week to decompress, really let everything sink in, would have been a much better play and would put me in a much better headspace going into the interview processes. It also just kind of gives you time to think about exactly what you need to do. You can think about what you're looking for in your next role. You can think about the types of companies that you're trying to work for. And I didn't do any of that. I just literally jumped right into it and started shotgun applying pretty much everywhere. I also mentioned that by the end of the 3 months, I was incredibly burnt out. So by the time I started my job, I was already burnt out. I definitely felt the effects of that my first couple months into the job. Performance was good and all that kind of stuff, but it just felt like I had never had any type of rest going into that job. It was like go, go, go from the moment I got laid off until I started, and then it just started all over again. So yeah, definitely very important to take some time for yourself. Not only at the beginning of the process, but also during the process as well. I mentioned that I was working significantly more hours on interview prep and interviewing and applying for jobs than I was at my job previously. I was pulling at least 60-hour weeks doing all of that kind of stuff. And it felt like it never stopped. There was no clocking out. I could always be doing another lead code question or applying for another job. And so often this went well past 5 o'clock. I'd be doing it into the nights. I'd be doing it in the mornings. And this all just contributed to that burnout and that mental state that I felt. In order to combat that, I would really focus on doing something that wasn't related to finding a job. So quite literally everything that I did during those 3 months was contributing to trying to find another job. Pretty much all of my hobbies went on pause. So I love playing music, hardly played any music. I love exercising, and I went to the gym for a little bit during this period, but for the most part, my physical health was declining as well as my mental health. I really enjoyed just being creative and building my own things, and I didn't do any of that. It was all just lead code, prepare for interviews, apply for more jobs. There was a week where I was in Mexico with my girlfriend and her family. We were on vacation, and I just had a really hard time enjoying that vacation because for the most part, I wasn't applying for jobs, and I had some interviews coming up that I wasn't preparing for as much as possible. And all of those things, I was just thinking about my unemployment status when I should have been having fun on this vacation, and I couldn't even do that. Finally, I do think that your physical health has a very immediate and direct correlation with your mental health. And I really wasn't taking care of my body or my mind. I think if this were ever to happen again in the future, I really need to prioritize my physical health. And it's almost like a great opportunity because all of a sudden you don't have this strict schedule that you have to abide by that you do in a 9-to-5 job. So you can take the time to go to the gym at 1 p.m. Or just spend a lot of time making a delicious and healthy meal. And all those things I kind of just neglected during these 3 months. So for me personally, the 3 things that I would do differently is take some time for myself at the beginning so that I don't burn out as fast. Make sure that I build in time for things throughout the day that aren't directly related to trying to find a new job. And then 3, just try and be as healthy as possible, physically and mentally. I know that everybody's situation is a little bit different as well. For example, I don't have kids, but I know that some of the folks that I worked with that were impacted by layoffs had children or newborns on the way, or were literally on paternity leave and they came back to no job. So, all those things can really factor into how quickly you need to get a new job. But if you have any kind of luxury in taking as much time as possible to get that new job, I really think you should give yourself that opportunity because we're going to be working for a long time. So if you can get a little 6-month break here and there, it's not the worst thing in the world. All right, so that pretty much wraps up my layoff story. I'm about 8 months removed from that initial layoff, and I'm really happy with, honestly, just the growth that I've seen in myself over these last 8 months. I think I've learned a lot about myself during the unemployment period, and also my new job is going really well, and I'm really happy with the new team that I'm on, new company that I'm at, and I think I'm getting a lot of new experiences and opportunities that I wasn't necessarily getting at my last company. So overall, things really worked out, and I can look back on this experience and kind of be thankful for some of the things that happened, though I hope it never happens again. Like I was saying before, if you were in a similar boat, if you've had this experience, or if you're currently experiencing that, like I said, if you needed someone to talk to, leave a comment down below. I will be responding to every single one. I wish y'all nothing but the absolute best, and I really do appreciate you watching and listening to my story. Hope y'all have a great rest of the day, and I will see you in the next one.